G'day, mate. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Aelexei Toliopolous.
And what do you do, Alexi?
What do? I do a lot of things. I'm a multi-hyphenated person. At the moment, I'm making a podcast about Australian cinema, which is a real passion of mine.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Crowdworkcast. My name's Andrew Barnett. Thanks so much for joining me. My guest this week is Aelexei Toliopolous, who is a filmmaker, a comedian, a documentarian, a podcaster, a man for all seasons. And I got to say, this chat was so much fun. I haven't had a chance to catch up with Aelexei in ages, so this was so nice just to get to chat with him for an hour. So hopefully you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed chatting to him. I'm sure you will. If you want to find Aelexei and find out what he's up to, he is on all social media pretty much as This Is Aelexei is his username. Aelexei spelled Alexei. You can find out everything he's up to there, including his many podcasts and other projects. The one podcast I will point you towards that he's doing at the moment is his current podcast. As you'll hear, we chat quite a bit about it. That he's very passionate about. It's called Sunburnt Screens, the Australian Cinema Odyssey. Check that out. Particularly if you're a cinephile, if you will. If you're into your films, Aelexei has impeccable taste, and he's super passionate about film. You're going to hear all about that in a second, so please stick around for that. Now, if you want to find me on social media, I am Andrew Barnett Comedy on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok even, which, yeah, I'm posting pretty regularly now, so if you want to find out what I'm up to, you can find me over there. If you are enjoying the podcast, please do like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. If you want to leave a review, that'd really help the podcast too. And if you're on YouTube, watching these on YouTube, please do like, subscribe. And if you are enjoying the podcast, reach out. Tell me you're enjoying it, or tell me what you think of the podcast. Let me know if there's anyone you'd like to hear me chat to, and what you'd like to hear me chat to them about. Please do let me know. Other than that, that's probably enough faffing around. Let's rip into it. This is my chat with Aelexei Toliopolous. Nice. Yeah, you do. You are a multi hyphenate. I was looking. I just had a look at your link tree just before in your in
Yeah.
your bio, just to make sure I'm like, okay, we'll make sure I cover everything he's up to, because you always seem to be doing different things. Like, it's funny, because we haven't actually seen each other in a while, but we used to bump
Yeah.
into each other quite a bit around the traps when you were
Often. Yeah.
back doing a heap of stand up. Are you not doing stand up at all anymore, or what's going on with your stand up first off?
I dip my toe probably a couple of times a year. Um, it's something I still love, but I mean, you know how it is. You have to really be in love with it to really put yourself into it. Like
Yeah.
back in the day when we were like bumping into each other, I was probably doing stand up like 5 times a week or 5 nights. When I say 5 times a week, I mean 5 nights. Often it'll be more than one gig a night.
Yeah.
And I think to keep that up, you have to like truly be in love with it. And I think over that time, I still love comedy so much. So much of my life is still dedicated to comedy. But I think through stand up, I was introduced to lots of other avenues to pursue comedy that I've found that I could thrive better in, and find that I could apply my voice to, or evolve my voice through a lot more. And it's just like, once you find that, it's hard to just go, well, every single night of my week, I'm going to give up and just be in this room with all my friends and the same people over and over again. And it kind of like that balance started shifting away from stand up to being like, okay, well, podcasting or writing or trying to make like documentaries that are funny and stuff. All these other artistic and creative pursuits just started being like, oh, I actually really like that more. And I think it was also because around that time when I started taking my foot off the gas, I was in film school. I went back to film school and was just like, oh man, I fucking love making movies so much. I love film and cinema so much. I was like, oh, I think this is like where I want to put my energy in.
Man, that makes sense. You know, because there's people that come and go, like in stand up, like people you see around, and like there's some like that come and go, and you're like, oh yeah, well, you sort of knew they weren't, it wasn't for
Mm,
them or whatever. But and there's other people that like are good, they just disappear, and you're like, where is that person? What, like you don't know. But you're
mm.
someone who falls in that you like you're good, and it was like I'm like, what? Why isn't Alexi doing it? And then you look at the stuff you're doing, and it makes so much sense. Like it's I get the feeling that the stuff you are, the projects you are working on, is almost like the stuff you should be doing in terms of your
Mm.
creative output and itch.
I mean, I hope so. It feels like that. And I think like, but every time when I jump back in, I go, oh my God, I love this so much. And like, I do so much stuff that's so adjacent to stand up. Like, that's
Yeah,
so like that kind of when I go, oh, I fed that monster inside me. Like when I'm doing them, I fed that monster. But then when you do something that's like exactly stand up, like I'm doing stand up, I go, oh, fuck, this is the most fun shit ever. I should change my life. I should go back to doing this every night. I should be doing this. But I think it was also just like I loved just doing stand up. I never really had the pursuit to do like like a 1 hour festival show or a special or something. I think I always had like, oh well, I want to do something bigger or like more constructed. I was like, oh, but I want it to be like different. I wanted to always do it as a podcast or as like a film of some kind. So it just really changed.
yeah. Well, as much as stand up is, I mean, you say it's very free. You can do what you want. There are
Yeah.
still there's certain things part of the construct that
Hmm.
that is limiting, and if you find better ways to or more fun ways to get that you know humor out there,
Yeah.
um, you know what I mean? Like you can
Yeah.
like, and that's the thing. Like you're man, you're busy. Like I'm looking at all the projects you work on. So let's obviously we're lamenting your stand up, but you can always come back to that. We'll
Yeah,
always
I can
welcome you
always come
back.
back.
And you
I'd love to come back as an old man, I reckon. That's what I want to do.
do you remember what was his name? Dave, was it Dave Pollard?
Dave Pollard. Dave Pollard. I think
Yeah.
about him very often. I go, that's my retirement plan. Retire, come back as an absolutely ancient fella, and just like no one's checking the time, no one's
Yeah.
no one's giving you the light, no one's giving you the bell. You can just sit down, tell like a barely audible story for hours.
Yeah, and then and just be filthy because you're
Hmm.
old and no one
Yeah.
expects that.
Man,
Mate, what a
I
future.
he's just someone that like he just pops into my head from time to time. Just go like, wow, there's so many like weird whack characters from that exact moment of history in like comedy that just don't exist anymore.
Oh, 100% true. I think of yeah, there's a few names that I think of like regularly. Like I'd like to
Mm,
know if Sue Thomas is still kicking around.
yeah.
Like she similar thing, just was always a
Hmm.
constant, never changed, never
Hmm.
and just that yeah, these people that like you drift in and out and you're just like, oh
Yeah.
wow. That's
Yeah. I do wonder. I wonder what she's up to.
man. Well, you know what? You're an investigative podcaster slash
Yeah.
journalist.
Hmm.
Next one,
Maybe that's my next mission. Finding
finding
Sue
Sue and
Thomas.
Dave.
Yeah, these very weird esoteric comedians from like 10 years ago that would do filthy material. Are they still around? What do they do? How do they get their filthy minds clean?
Oh man, because I think yes, she was a librarian, wasn't she? Or that could have
She's a
been
librarian.
uh,
Oh yeah, exactly.
part of
Where
the
was the
persona. Who
character? Where
knows?
was the character? Where was the human?
Right. So let's talk about that. Your podcast. So you got a series. You got a web documentary. You and Cameron James,
Hmm.
one of those characters from 10 years ago who's still kicking around. One of the great guys.
Hmm.
Mate, finding Jesus. This so where can people find that first off? And
That's on YouTube on the Grass House YouTube channel.
so how did you two end up doing a web documentary, basically?
Wow. I'm trying to think of where to even start with that because we'd been podcasting together for a while.
Mm.
And then I came across a story. Well, I came across I came across, I guess, an artifact years ago. This would be back in like 2016, 2017, and I came across something, and then we did like a chat about it on this podcast, on our podcast back in the day. And I always knew there was something bigger there. And I was studying documentary at film school. That was like my major. And I really am attracted to factual storytelling and factual filmmaking. And I always knew that I want to make like a documentary that felt like you're like pulling at that thread, like stumbling across something and then feeling that energy of like, I need to get to the end of this. I need to pull at that thread. And when I came across this story, I knew that was the one to do. And at that time, I made a short film about it at film school, and I had like great mentorship from Anna Bronowski, who's one of my favorite documentary filmmakers. She made this movie called Forbidden Lies, which is definitely like, the ancestor to the kind of stuff that I want to make, but in a much more serious way. And at that time, ABC had put like this call out to podcasters that had like an established audience, but that wanted to pursue something bigger. And I just thought, oh, this is perfect for Cam and I to use this story that we found to turn it into like a much bigger podcast with like a ABC budget and like a way to like tell a story that way. And basically what I submitted to the ABC as my pitch was literally, no shit, no word of a lie, was the assignment that I did for film school, like the paper pitch assignment that I had to do, like where you just like go, this is what I want to make. And I had gotten a really good mark for it. So I was like, oh, this is pretty good. And I just went and did Command F, all film references, changed them to podcast references. That's it. And submitted it. And we were like the one of two selected out of like thousands applicants. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we're making this. And ever since then, that wasn't when we made Finding Drago back in 2018, 2019. And kind of ever since then, it's something that Cam and I have always wanted to do, is like continue pursuing making these documentaries. So we made one more for the ABC with Finding Desperado, another kind of like audio documentary. And then we kind of got the urge to go like, why don't we try and go video? See, and we found this story that felt like the right one to make that shift with. And we went to the Auntie Donna guys, went with Finding Jesus. We got the funding and we got to make it. So now we've made the jump to video documentaries as well. And hopefully it's something we can keep pursuing.
Man, that's a great, or it's one of those things that's in some ways an organic thing it came out of your interest. And I think that's one of the things that when you listen to those or watch that Finding Jesus, you can tell that it is part of yours and Cam's natural curiosity. Like it's not a thing like, okay, this was assigned to us. It's like there's genuine curiosity in the stories, which I think is, especially with podcasting, part of the because it's such an intimate medium.
Yeah.
I think you need that. Like I don't know, like I don't know about you, but I listen to a lot of podcasts just because whenever I have trouble sitting with my own thoughts if I'm doing daily tasks. So whenever I'm kicking around the house, I've just always got a podcast going or whatever. And that is the thing. I find those ones where you can tell that, like, because I try not to just listen to comedy podcasts now. I try and do, more, but the ones where you can feel that the interviewer, if it's an interview, is interested or is genuinely interested in the subject matter. And they're learning stuff along the way too. It's such a I find it a fun way to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like you got to have a curious mind to like be trying to make that stuff. And it's just like about, like, I often think about it as just like a way of like feeding that curiosity. It's like, well, I get to do this. Like that's sick. Like that's a great way to do it. It's just like, feeding it all.
But that's where when I look at like I was looking at all the stuff you've done, because you seem to always be doing different, like not completely different stuff, but you do a bunch of different things, but it's all fits within your interest, like stuff that you're genuinely passionate about. Like so tell me about your podcast you got at the moment about Australian cinema.
Oh, so this is a real passion project of mine, Sunburnt Screens, the Australian Cinema Odyssey. I think the way that I've kind of been putting it is like I think it's one of my missions on Earth to like celebrate cinema, particularly Australian cinema. And I think that, when you and I were younger, I think there was a much bigger cultural embracing of like our film and
Mm,
our cinema and like our the output that we were having artistically in this country was quite embraced by the public. But I think that over the years, there has been not even a shift away from it. I just think that it has, like, people just don't even know what's happening. Like, there's less of like a mainstream. And I think it's because we got less of a monoculture going on, where it's, especially when it comes to arts, a lot of the times what people are, the way people discover the arts and discover art in general, but specifically with film, it's it's like a personal journey now, where it's just
mm,
like they find you have to be hunting for it and looking out for stuff. So it's kind of like you only kind of know what's happening now, or like the little things you have interest in. So I kind of have thought like, well, it's something that I really care a lot about. It's like helping people discover film and helping people find that introduction, open up that gateway to cinema and kind of help them on the path to like really falling in love with film and falling in love with cinema. And I think it's just been something I've always really cared so deeply about, because it's been the thing that has enriched my life personally, like growing up. It's just like completely enriched my life and enriched my experience. So it's something I really want to pass on and really want to continue helping people find. It's something I always wanted to do. And then this opportunity came up to finally make it as a podcast. And it was a thing that at first I was like, oh, I don't know if I have time to do this. But then, like, almost immediately go, well, this is a thing that you have to make time for, because it's the way to do it. And the way for me to, even on a selfish level, and it's a very selfish level, is getting to meet and talk to and ask all the questions I've wanted to ask for like filmmakers that I've admired and deeply respected and resonated with their work for my entire life. So it's been like both like a selfish and like selfless pursuit combined into one.
mate, it's fascinating what you say about the like helping people find it, because you're right about the like at the moment that lack of monoculture. Like, there's almost
Mm.
so few cultural touchstones that come from the arts now.
Mm-hmm.
That and it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. It was like when like we were younger, when I was a kid, like I loved loved going to the video store and
Yeah.
picking the one that like you get an overnight, and you try and get a weekly as well, because then you got one you can hold on to for a few days. There's no
Yeah.
rush watching that. But then
Mm-hmm.
but now, like, and if you'd said to me then, like, there's going to exist in your lifetime um as much entertainment as you want, you'd be able to have it all on demand. Like a genie came and said, I'll give you this. I would have been like, oh, there's no downside to this. But
Mm.
the almost the sting in the tail of, be careful what you wish for is now, yeah, everything you could ever want, all the good quality entertainment is going to be available to you at the like press of a button, but it's also going to be hidden amongst a pile of shit that, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I find at the moment the hardest thing is like, because there's so many different things going on. It's what they what people call like trying to find the signal in the noise, like
Mm.
in terms of like there's so much background noise that and then you're trying to hear that, okay, where is the good bit of quality? Like, how do you go about, like, in terms of Australian cinema, because there's still stuff being put
Mm-hmm.
out, but how do you go about trying to, like, how do you decide what you're gonna pick to introduce the audience to first off? Like, do you have obviously everyone's got their favorites, but do
Yeah.
you have a certain genre or a certain time period in Australian cinema that you lean towards?
Oh, that's such a great question, because I think I think because it's like my life has been dedicated to the pursuit of enjoying cinema, that I have experienced a lot of it. Like, I've just been able to kind of like really see so much. And it's partly of being like being fortunate to have grown up in a time where I do have that access, like through internet, but
Mm.
also, I worked in video stores for like my whole adolescent years.
Which
To
now
what?
I heard a
Yeah.
rumor. Which video store did you work in?
I worked at two video stores. The main one I worked at was between the age of 15 and 20 or 21. Whenever it closed down, I worked at this store called Mondo Movies in Annandale, which is like an art house and cult video store.
I used to. I lived in Annandale for a bit, and I used
Get
to
out.
go there, and I remember that was an intimidating place to
No
hire.
way.
Hire.
I probably was intimidating you, mate. It was probably me behind the
That was
counter.
what I was. I'm joining these dots because someone said to me, "I'm sure Alexi would." Because I told someone about this like video store. I used to go in, and sometimes I just wanted to. You just want to hire a mindless film sometimes, but I'd always
Yeah.
get another one as well, just because I wanted. Because the staff there was so like you, so plugged into everything, and they'd recommend stuff, and I'd always because they'd be so passionate about the recommendations. Like if they recommended something to me, I'd feel guilty not hiring it, so I'd take
Wow.
that, and so I'd often get two or three things, and I'm like, okay, I'll watch this tomorrow
Wow. I'm an
morning when I'm in
upseller.
a different. Yeah, it was amazing. And then
I supersized you.
you'd come back in and they'd remember what'd you think of that? Well, if you like this, what about this? And it was
Wow.
but it was good because it pushed me out of my comfort zone. Because
Far
now
out.
that's
Do you remember anything that you got recommended back there? Anything you
you know,
discovered?
the one was I think it was Goodbye Lenin.
Wow, that might have been me. That was one that I would recommend back then.
I was gonna say that I really enjoyed that because it was offbeat, it was funny, but
Yeah.
and I remember at the time thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to read subtitles all night. Like I
And
don't
I
know
would
if I'm
have
in that
held
mood.
my nose up at you snoodily.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, I'll hire. And then I remember watching and going, that was so good. I should watch more like foreign cinema.
Wow.
And ever since I moved away from Annandale and didn't go to that DVD, I've just fallen back into my own, my old
Wow. Hey,
habits of laziness.
what years were you there?
This would have been 2004, 2003,
Far
maybe.
out. That's maybe a little bit before my time. I would have been a customer every now and then around then. I think
Yeah.
when did I start working there? 2005 and 6 maybe.
Oh, we would have just missed each other. Yeah,
Far
because I think
out.
by
Yeah.
2005 I was living over San Susie way, but yeah,
Wow.
had a little place down there. Just basically lived off the end of Johnson Street there, and
Yeah.
yeah, it
Holy
was.
shit, man. What a small world.
I know. That was it. Made when someone said to me, they go, "I reckon that'd be the place." Alexi used to work in it. Yes, and I'm like, that'd have to be there. And it just made
Yeah.
perfect sense. I could see you just loving work because then they had just a different a just a different selection to like
Hmm.
your Civic or your Blockbuster or whatever it was. It was great.
Yeah. It was all about like that cult and that art house, and like they had everything. And it also had like a much bigger collection than most video stores, and
Yeah.
like wider, just so it would have all the stuff you would get at any other video store, but then it would be like, okay, we've also imported all this shit from like who knows where you can't find them anywhere else in the country. Is just this like this video store, maybe one or two other ones in Sydney that existed back then, and then nowhere else. So man, you've seen the inside of my brain. Like that's you're one of the early people that, because that store closed 2012, 2011, 2012.
Just they
In
held
my
on though for
memory,
a bit.
they did hold on, and I think now that if it was still around, it would be killing it. And I think like there's a few video store, like they're all gone now. Even
Mm,
Film Club closed like last year, and there was a last store in Thurul or something just closed. And I
okay.
think that all of these shops just missed it. Where I think if one was around now that did this speciality thing, or if one were to start now, I don't know. Maybe it's just my hopeful brain thinking it, but I think it could do something. But yeah, man, that's like not very many people know that place anymore, Mondo Movies. But you're one of the few people that has seen the inside of my head and the inside of my soul, probably.
Yeah, well, mate, and that was it was such an intimidating place if you
Mm,
yeah in one way, but like I literally when I was
mm.
returning DVDs if I was hiring another one, I would have to think about what I was going to say to because they'd always ask, "What did you think?" and they'd have a specific question, or what
Yeah.
do you think of this? Oh, did you like that? Like, did you like
Yeah.
this element of it? And I'd always have to think, okay, what did I think of this movie? Like, it's not just
Yeah.
putting it in the slot. They have questions like, oh man, I got to review this film.
Yeah. I think that's something that you put really nicely is like, I think that taking those steps or like trying to take your steps into like embracing some kind of artistry or like going into something or going in deeper, it is really intimidating. And
Mm.
like that's kind of what I think is genuinely was my training ground was like being in that store. It was as important to me as going to film school. And it costs way less because I got paid to be there instead of like putting my entire inheritance and savings into going to film school. But I think it was just as important because it kind of showed me like the way that people interact with film and the way that people like interested in it. And so much of like what I do now is informed by that in being like it isn't acknowledging that it can be intimidating and then doing everything I can to make it welcoming and everything I can to take that intimidation and I hopefully the pretension away from that as much as possible. I think like it's easy to be pretentious about film, but I think it's like pretension it does when you think about pretension it does serve a purpose because it's about like going deeper and like celebrating the artistic qualities of things. But I think the way that I've tried to do it is to like remove the intimidation around the pretension. So it's like, oh, to speak to it in a way that's really communicative and exciting and with passion and inspiration rather than like the fucking boredom of like, oh, this works because of this. To just go, hey, I'm excited it works because of this.
It's funny you say that. I think about this a lot with, especially even with comedy, is
Definitely.
working out a way to you can do what you want and you do what I say to like younger comedians who are like, oh, how do you get like this kind of audience? And like,
Mm,
do you change what you do? I'm like, I don't change the material, but sometimes
mm.
I change the way I try and make it easy, accessible, basically. You're
Yes.
talking about
Yeah.
accessibility. Like you got to meet an audience, and whether that's an audience where you're trying to, you know, get people involved and passionate about film, you got to meet them where they are, and you've got to
Mm.
make it. Yes, it's coming. It's not so you don't sound. And one of the things I love about the way you talk about film is you're not talking about it from a point of view where you're. It never feels like you're trying to show what you know about film.
Mm.
You're trying to demonstrate why you love something about the film
Mm.
or why you thought something didn't work. It's just it's coming from a place of passion about the film rather than a place of I want to show off how much I know about film.
Well, thank you very much. That's what I hope I do. I appreciate
Mate,
that.
but I will say you try not to be intimidating. I did the Dude Cinema Pod
Hmm.
a little while ago, and I thought I'll listen to a few episodes, see how much prep I've got to do. And I listened to a couple of yours, which was a massive mistake. I'm like, oh man, I have to know about
Yeah.
cinematographers and framing,
Yeah.
like stuff you knew. I'm like, oh, because I did, mate. I will say I
Mhm.
did one unit of introduction to film studies at Newcastle
Whoa. Okay.
Uni in
Yes.
it's 2000. So I'm not. I've still got the book somewhere. My brother,
Yeah.
he'd done it a couple of years before. He'd done the same subject, so I bought his textbook off him. But it smelled like bourbon because a bottle of bourbon had broken in the back of his car. So we tried it out, and the pages worked, but it was better than paying $70 for a new textbook.
Yeah. Dude, textbooks are such a rort, man. Like, I still
Oh,
feel the sting. And there's so many that I've kept around because I'm like, well, I fucking spent so much money on this shit book that I never read. But then there's a few that I'm like, okay, that one I'm keeping. There's a thing that I learned from that one. I can just go back and get it if I need it, if I lose it from my brain. But also, I would say, like, it's about how to do the prep. The thing is, for those kind of podcasts and stuff, is like, yeah, the I don't do much prep before, but I did all the prep like 4 years.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
exactly.
so now it's like I can do all these things just on a whim, but it's like, yeah, unfortunately, it's the only thing I know. Like, I don't know. I have no, like, if I had to change industries, like, if I had to go, like, well, oh, well, this hasn't worked out. Let me just go back to what my backup was. Mate, there's no backup. I'm like, I have to become a real estate agent or some shit. Like,
Right, you could, you know what, you could become an announcer of some kind at like, doing doing public announcements at a train station
Yeah.
or something because you got the voice for it. I remember you did that years ago. You were doing the barking outside the Enmore during the Sydney Comedy
Oh yeah.
Festival. It
Man, I
was,
used to love doing that, the announcements for the comedy festival, because I used to be taking such pride to go like, man, who's on tonight? I'm gonna sell them out. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna sell out this show.
and that's what you want from the person doing that job. A little
Yeah,
bit
I
of
was like, I
passion.
want to sell them out. Like, what all my friends are on tonight? How many tickets do they have left? All right, let's do it. I'm on the main street of Enmore. Surely I can get some people off the street to come see a show.
I remember that, and that's what I remember bumping into you one night because I was doing a show in one of the
Mm,
little rooms there,
mm.
and I remember seeing you and saying g'day, and I'm like, hey, I reckon I've got at least four people coming to your show tonight.
I didn't even say hello. I'm just like, man,
You
I'm
were
on the
excited,
job
you
for
were
you,
pumped
brother.
up, and I'm like, yes, this is what I want. This is what I need. We're gonna have a barker. Let's go. Let's have them passionate about what they're doing. And and same as your movie reviews, you knew the comedians, so you knew who to recommend what to, and it
Hmm.
was
Exactly.
mate, same approach. Nothing's changed, just different
Nothing's changed.
different
Just
format now.
exactly different format.
Right. So let's talk about
Mhm.
cinema because now you guys, you also actually, this is something I wanted to ask you
Mhm.
about. And I ever since I saw it, I've been wanting to ask you about it, but I haven't seen you in forever.
Yep.
So you guys, you and Cameron used to have a podcast called Mic Check. Are you
Yes.
still doing Mic Check at all?
It's we haven't done one in a while, but that's the one thing that we can't come out of retirement. If Mike does something significant, like last year, I think it was, or
So
maybe it was the year before.
explain the premise of Mic Check, and
Yeah.
then let's get to that. Let's get to what you're talking about there.
So Mike Check is a podcast dedicated to Mike Myers. We check in on the films of Mike Myers to see if they're still shagadelic. And most of the time, in our opinion, they still were shagadelic. So it was like each episode would either be about a movie and or his SNL career, or if he did a weird interview, we would do an episode. Like it was just about everything at a
He's
certain
good for a
point.
weird interview too at
Mhm.
times.
Exactly. So it was about everything at a certain point, and it was kind of like I guess what brought an audience to Cam and I was like doing this a really weirdly specific podcast, especially something that was so specific and niche at that time that if you heard that premise, you were either like, well, that sounds stupid, or that sounds so stupid, I will be on that journey with them. Like it
Yes.
was like the only two options if
Yeah,
like you
that
hear
sounds
that
stupid,
premise.
or that's my kind of stupid.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just like, okay, we figured it out. We figured it out. So I would say that yes, it's dormant. I
Ooh,
describe it as dormant because I think that if there's the right thing that comes around, we will come back. Like I think it was last year or the year before, you had a Netflix TV series called The
yes,
Pentaveret.
the Pentaveret. Now, I was excited to watch that,
Hmm.
and I've been wanting to ask you your thoughts on that series since I saw it.
Well, obviously, I loved it, brother. It was my
Good.
favorite comedic voice coming back and doing something purely in his unhinged voice. So I was like, man, I loved it. I loved it. And it's like that people have criticisms, but I'm like, I don't see them. I'm just like, this is my guy. He's back.
That's what I was like too. Like I'm obviously a fan of his, but
Hmm.
when I watched, because sometimes I was nervous to watch it. I'll be honest,
Yes, me
because
too. I'll admit to it too.
there hasn't been he hadn't put out much in a while, and there had been some weird interviews, and you're like, oh,
Hmm.
maybe Mike's lost a step, but I thought it was actually pretty not only funny but also kind of it was some clever storytelling and some very
Mm,
there was some interesting themes and commentary in it that I thought was great too, like
yeah,
just the way news works
yeah,
and then just some of
exactly.
the most creative gags, like that Canada's not in HD when when they cross the border, the frame shape changed, and that sort of creative stuff that's properly unhinged Mike Myers brain is yeah. I'm so glad you liked it. He
Man, I loved it. I loved it, but it's in everything you said, like that joke about Canada not being in HD. I was like, okay, the man is back. He's still got the mojo, baby. He's doing weird new jokes. And I think as well, that show I love because it looked fucking great, man. Like it looked
Mm.
like a Stanley Kubrick movie sometimes. I was just like, man, you don't see comedy have style that often. And I think that's probably one of the reasons I always loved him, maybe even like subconsciously or whatever, was like, oh, his shit looks good. Like the movies look fucking beautiful.
What's your best? What do you think was peak Mike so far? Let's
Oh,
not write him off. He might not
yeah,
have peaked
thank
yet.
you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are indoctrinated, it would appear. I don't know. I mean, it's the battle between the two greats, Wayne's World and Austin Powers. I can't.
Mm.
I think like if you do put a gun to my head, I might have an answer, but thankfully that's not happened yet. And it's come close. It's come close. I've had a knife pulled on me, but even then, I can't. I can't pick. I guess if I don't know. They both have things I love about them. I can't. I can't choose.
No,
Please don't make me choose.
I'm not going to
Please
make you choose. No, I'm happy with that answer. It's funny. I remember watching as a kid So I Married an Axe Murderer.
I love that movie. Okay, I'll tell you this. I watched it again a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
First time in almost 10 years, I guess, that I watched a Mike Myers movie off the clock for pleasure.
just
I honestly couldn't tell you the last time that happened. Would have been like what pre 2015 that I had done that.
wow. And so, does it hold up? Is the question.
I had a great time. I loved it. It was
Yeah,
fantastic.
I
Yeah.
remember. I remember seeing it. Must have been pretty young when I saw it. I don't know what year that came out.
Mm.
But yeah, I remember being I must have been before I was like I would have been less than 16 because it was when we were
Mm-hmm.
living in Corowa and I remember the video store and getting it from the video store. But I remember at the time thinking it was parts of it were funny, but kind of not. I don't think I got the darkness of the humor as a little
Mm-hmm.
kid, and I rewatched it probably in my 20s, in my early to mid 20s, and was like, oh, this is a different film. It's a different film to what I remembered because it just hit me different as an adult, where you can understand the darker sort of humor. And so yeah, that was an
Mm.
interesting. That's one too that was probably earlier than it was that. That's one of his earliest, isn't it? So I Married an Axe Murderer.
It's just after Wayne's World.
Is
So
it?
it's like yeah, Wayne's World's like the first movie, and then he does that like right after.
Wow.
Yeah, year or two after. Yeah, yeah.
Man. So now, so we obviously, I'm not going to make you rank your Mike Myers movies any further
All
than
right.
that. But Australian cinema, let's talk. Who are your favourites in Australian cinema?
Whoa, far out. Great question. Directors or like actors
Let's
or
start with
films?
directors. How
Yeah.
excited are you for the new Mad Max coming out with Dr. George?
Hugely excited with Dr. George. Oh man, that trailer was fantastic. Just,
Really?
I
I'm
just think
glad you
he's,
said that because
yeah.
my cousin is actually working on that film as
Oh,
he's an
wow.
animator now, and
Yeah.
so in Fury Road, this is I told him I wouldn't tell this on podcast anymore, but
Yes.
fuck it,
You
who's
have
listening
to.
anyway?
Yeah.
So one of the things he's worked on a bunch of different like he worked on Gatsby, he worked on that, and one of the things he's done in a lot of the feature films where it's live action and they're animating is he always finds a way to put his face in the film. So
Yes.
there's a scene in Gatsby where everyone in the background has his face. Women, kids, men, everyone has his face. But the one he did, my favorite is during Fury Road. So he was working for like there was a bunch of different animation like
Mhm.
effects companies that worked on it, but he was working right at the end. He was working for the actual production for Miller's company,
Yep.
and he the scene where Rictus pulls the engine out and lifts it
Mm.
above his head, the strongman. There is, I think, 2 frames where Rictus is my cousin.
Wow.
He went in, took a photo of himself, put it in. So if you accidentally paused at the right time in that film, you would see a not so buff. Let's say
Wow.
that a not so buff dude.
Mate, I look for very few reasons to rewatch Fury Road because you can chuck it on at any time. I think that's all the convincing I need to probably watch it again by the end of this week. Just
Excellent.
what a great movie. Yeah, I think George Miller has like really ascended to a whole new level. I loved the film that he made last year as well, 3,000 Years of Longing, that I think a lot of people dismissed it because he was trying something different. Like it was this exploration of love through like the origins of storytelling, which I found just like completely mesmerizing. But I would definitely put him up there because he's just, I mean, the technique is unparalleled. Like there's
Mm.
no one a technician like him on Earth, and he did it all. Like he's just, I think he's a real genius, a mad genius, if you will. Who else I really love? Rolf de Heer. I really love Rolf de Heer. He's like the Tracker, Ten Canoes, Bad Boy Bubby, Dingo. I think that he is another person where the craft is impeccable. And his films, he's like a real experimenter. Like all his films, they're all so different from each other. And I think that in his pursuit of all of that, like he's really made some really exciting experiments in cinema, especially Bad Boy Bubby. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, oh, not in a long time, but yeah, that was another one that I
Man,
was like, wow, it just blew my mind when I saw it. Probably saw it
it's
too
a
young, but
absolute man. You're never the right age to see that movie, I
yeah,
reckon. But it's a crazy movie, and it's just like beautifully experimental. The journey it takes you on is like unparalleled because it starts so claustrophobic and like cruel, and then by the end, you have like this journey of human empathy that this character's
mm,
gone on and human connection, and by the end, you're like, this is one of the most empathetic, like transcendent movies ever, and it's all like in the technique. Like he used every scene shot by a different cinematographer, and
really.
every yeah, and all the sound is captured through binaural microphones placed behind the actor Nicholas Hope's ears. So every sound you hear is how Bubby would hear it in the world. And it's just like like everything that he did on that film was an experiment, and it's all a success. And I find that so admirable because I think that's pretty rare to like have
That
experimental film that's a success.
well, especially when you like a lot of when people do experiment in film
Mm.
and it's often they'll experiment in one area, not
Yeah,
when it's
every
and yeah,
aspect.
when every aspect is experimental and it works. That's
Hmm.
if you can experiment in one area and have it work, that's a miracle. The experiment in multiple and have it all work is yeah, that's there's a little bit of genius going on there, I think.
I think so. I think so. I have to agree. I also really love Gillian Armstrong. Like that's another person that I really love. Like My Brilliant Career, Last Days of Shane New, High Tide, and her documentary films. I very much admire filmmakers that do factual filmmaking documentaries, and they also do narrative, fictional, or traditional cinema,
Mm.
and where you can kind of see they how they inform each other. So I think she's been someone I've admired for like my whole life as well.
Mate, I was lucky enough to meet her years ago now. I hosted
Wow.
Newcastle had the Newcastle Real Film Festival, and it was like a
Mm.
documentary film festival.
Yeah.
And through Mitch Garling of all people, was
Wow.
he'd been up there, he'd been doing studying film or something,
Hmm.
something at one of the colleges up there, and then through their college's connection to the festival, he said, "Oh, like they were looking for an MC." And
Mm.
he goes, "Oh, Andrew would be able to do it. He'd probably come up and do it, you know." And so I went up and so I did a little panel where I interviewed her
That's
and a
sick.
couple of other directors, and then I got to go that night. They had the this like it was an early screening of Love Marilyn. It was a documentary about Marilyn Monroe,
Yeah, yeah.
and then walking back from the theater, the cinema to the event after the post event, I was walking with her and I'm blanking on the name of the Australian producer director that I was with as well. But
Mm.
there was a couple of Australian luminaries, and I'd watched the
Wow.
documentary. I'm like, that is amazing. Like I'm just watching it as
Mm.
a bright eyed, and then walking back, and they're talking like, yeah, I reckon I could have cut 25 minutes out of that. And I'm like, and they're just going into the real technical stuff. And I'm like, oh, you
Yeah.
guys enjoyed this for a completely different reason. I was
Hmm.
just enjoying learning about Marilyn Monroe, but they're watching it with a real technical eye. It was fascinating.
Oh wow, that's so sick.
That's
You just got
exactly,
like the full little, the glimpse into how they watch it.
yeah, it was really one of those ones where I was like, this, it was just one of those, you get those weird sort of gigs sometime where it's like,
Hmm.
and then you're
Oh
like, oh, you
man,
know what? I don't know if I'm right for this, but I'll just, it sounds interesting. I'll give it a crack and see how we
hmm,
go. And I just remember I look like I swatted up so much on my film stuff. Just know because when I was hosting the panel, I just didn't want to ask dumb
yeah,
questions or
yeah.
seem dumb. And so I did that. And then it was like, host it and then throw it out to the audience and that. So I was just like, I've never concentrated so hard in terms of listening to their answers so I could ask the
Hmm.
follow up or whatever.
Yeah,
It was like studying, going back to school for that one. But
yeah.
it was such a fun event. I'm so glad I did it.
Man, that's beautiful. I'm glad you did it too. I think that's great because especially like, you do get those weird gigs, right? Where you're just like, oh yeah, am I going to do this? What am I going to do this? Or like, oh, I guess I have to do this for some reason. And then sometimes those are the ones that just like they stick with you,
Mm.
either for a good reason or you go, what the fuck was I doing? Why did I do this thing? Why did I say yes to this?
Yeah. Yeah. You always get something out of a taking a risk, I think. Like, even
Mm.
if it's just learning, like, I never want to have to do that again.
I never want to take a risk
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. But, there are those gigs. And I try and constantly remind myself, okay, and it was actually something I heard recently. I was listening to like, I don't even know who the person was, but it was someone who writes about finding potential. And
Mm.
the point they were making was practice and perfection, like getting better at something comes from putting yourself in an uncomfortable space.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So like practice is only worthwhile if you're making yourself uncomfortable, and you shouldn't be scared to
Mm.
be uncomfortable. And I was like, I'm like make sure I do that because it's very easy now, especially when you um when I've been doing comedy a while. It's very
Mm.
easy to know which gigs I'm comfortable doing and which ones I'm not. And I'm trying to remind myself, okay, you still got to push yourself to get uncomfortable at times. Do you
Yeah.
find that in your in your projects because you one of the things I really admire about the way you approach all the stuff you do is you follow your curiosity, but you don't seem to be shy about putting yourself in an area that just because you haven't done something before, like necessarily you're not going to not go down that area. Is that something you is a conscious of, or is
Mm.
that just sort of you're in that frame of mind? Well, like I want to do it. Let's just see how it goes.
I don't know. It's a great question to think about because I think what helps me is kind of knowing what I want to do rather, and then I think I don't really see it as a risk because I'm like, well, I'm going to enjoy making it, so I don't see that the risk. Like I think for me it's the risk is like, well, if I'm doing something that I don't want to do, that's the risk because it's like I don't think I'll make it very well. I don't think that it will come. I don't think my essence will come through it because it's like, well, I'm just doing something for like whatever the other reason would be, like whether it's I need to do a job or I need to like make money or something like that. So it's kind of, I guess that's the only risk I ever see going like, well, the main risk is I don't want to be bored. Like it will suck to like just be bored and feel unattached and feel unaligned making something and just go, well, I think that's my main I guess the main reason is like I just want to do something that I think I will enjoy and something that I will care about and can like throw myself into.
So would you say that the enjoyment for you comes more from the outcome or the process? Like do you
Oh,
is the enjoyment
wow.
that seeing the finished product, or are you deriving as much or more from the actual process of making the finished product?
It's never the same answer, I would say. It's never the same answer because a lot of the time like the process can be like hard. Like you can just be
Mm.
like, oh damn, I'm really stuck in this. I can't figure it out. But then when you have that revelatory moment where you go, oh, something just clicked for me and I know how to like how I've solved that problem or whatever.
Mm.
That's so cool. Like that's so golden. And I think with all this kind of stuff and like creative pursuit, it all really is just problem solving. Like filmmaking is problem solving. It's always problem solving. So when you have those like moments of realization, those clicks, you go, I've solved the problem. That's what you're in pursuit of. And then like there's so much joy in like like the project I'm working on now where it's like interviewing filmmakers. Like a lot of the joy is like coming up for it. I did interview Gillian Armstrong, and so to prepare, I'd seen most of her movies before, but now I was like, well, I watched 15 of her movies either for the first time or rewatches like leading up to this interview with her. And that was great. Like even watching all her films again completely reinvigorated my love for like cinema, especially Australian cinema. And then interviewing her was just like, oh, great. Like I was able to like ask her great questions and she was able to like give me great answers. And like that was really powerful and satisfying. And then, but there is a point like where you're just making something and then you just get stuck in the weeds, like making it. You just go, well, I'm editing it. All I can do is like keep on editing it. And a thing that I really like about podcasting or even like YouTube, new media stuff is there's a point where it has to go out. Like you just have to, you can't
Yeah.
just be stuck making it. You have to put it out. And so now that this show started coming out, I mean, this is just the example that's clearest in my head still, is like then seeing it be received and like with podcasting with YouTube or whatever, you do see the way people receive it because people will comment, people will post, people will message you. And that's been really great because at first I was like, oh man, like I'm making this thing. Is it even going to translate outside my head for
Yeah.
about like Australian cinema? And I'm like, I'm getting paid to make it. I go, what if I flopped? Like, what if I've just made something that's just like so internal and so like doesn't translate to like what I'm trying to do and what my ideals for it are? But then seeing people like go, in the first episode of this podcast, this new podcast, first two episodes are about like modern Australian horror, like horror in the 21st century, because I do truly believe that we're in like a very powerful period of genre filmmaking and cinema in Australia. And I think that right now we've hit like this powerful peak in this decade between The Babadook to Talk to Me.
Mm.
There's like so many of these great films around it and maybe not everyone's heard of the other films apart from like the big ones. So I used it as an opportunity to kind of introduce people to it. And then I started off going, well, a wave doesn't just come out of nowhere. Like what was happening right before then? So I started looking at like the little precursor films, like in horror space from like the 2000s, like what was happening. And there was a film called The Tunnel, like 2011 it came out. It's like a found footage horror faux documentary about going down into the tunnels near St James Station, like underneath Sydney, and like traveling around them. And like that, and when you get down there, you're not alone. Like there's something else down there. Like that's such a fun premise. I
That's
remember
great.
seeing it when it first came out, and it just scared the absolute fuck out of me. And I just was like, well, I interviewed the writer of that and the producer, and when the podcast came out, I started getting all these messages. Like, dude, heaps of freaking messages. People being like, I'd never seen this film before, never heard of it before. Thank you for introducing me to it. I watched it this weekend with all my friends and stuff. So it was like heaps and heaps of messages. And the filmmaker messaged me like, dude, so many people are messaging me saying that they just watched The Tunnel for the first time. And I was like, oh shit, that worked. And I think in that exact sense, I was go, man, getting the product or getting it out into the world and the finished products, I was like, oh, okay, it might have worked. I felt
Yeah.
really good about it. And I think in that sense, it was all about the process. But then getting it out into the world was even better than the process.
That's obviously it must be super satisfying in that the reason you went through the process and
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it or not the process, and not necessarily so, there's parts of any given process creatively where you are,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, you're in the weeds and it doesn't feel fun, but the satisfaction that comes when it's all done, and then the
Yeah.
satisfaction of that reception um must be huge. Hey, with Australian cinema, and I was thinking about this particularly with what you're saying about the horror, we're in, like the genre
Mm.
we're in at the moment, the genre wave we're in, is I mean, I think there's been a few Australian sort of horror films that sort of broke people into Hollywood. I'm thinking
Mm.
of the Saw, obviously, but
Yeah.
how much do you think Australian cinema and the the innovations that have come out of Australian cinema, uh, you can accredit to the fact that it is a smaller market. It's a smaller industry, and in a lot of ways, there's just not the resources in sort of that there are in a big market like the US or
Mm.
even India now. How much do you think that shapes the way Australians approach their sort of filmmaking and their storytelling through that sort of thing? Like they and how much innovation comes from that?
It's interesting because I think that there's a few factors that like come into play there. Because, a lot of our filmmaking here is like it's a pretty small community. Like it's
Mm.
not huge, but in the same way that stand up is, like, you know almost every stand up in the country. Like when you're in comedy, like you meet
Yeah.
them, you hear about them, and it's a circle. So film is probably not too different in that regard because it's quite small. Um, I would say though, like we film, like we have like really high quality crews because people come make like blockbusters here. So a
Mm.
lot of the crews work on those big films. So they're like highly skilled. Like we have some of the best crew film members like behind the scenes in the entire world because they just can like they ply their craft on really big things, and then they can also put that into smaller independent films as well. And then in Australia, because we are film basically only exists as indies or the blockbusters that come from overseas.
Mm.
And then most of the financing does come through, like, the government funding bodies like Screen Australia and stuff. And so there is like a lot of like thought in making films that are deemed to be culturally significant. So there's a lot of things but I think that changes. Like a lot of the times that changes. Like it's Screen Australia, they go, well, horror is a great way to communicate to people. So they make like these incentives or initiatives that embrace that. And I think it's all about like, you know, a lot of it is going like, well, what is significant right now? What are the kind of voices that we need in film? So I think that's like a way that our film scene can thrive is by just going like, well, what does it need? Like, what does it need to be to thrive? Like, what are the things to kind of keep it interesting? And I think that it's weird because it's always like in a state of flux, I'd say. And I think because it's like a lot, because it does depend on government funding. And then
Mm.
we've had a lot of, governments that do not care about the arts and defund the arts. So it's always like on the back foot of like, how do we even make stuff in this country then? And so it's, it has to stay relevant. Like it has to stay relevant by no choice. So it has to keep experimenting or it has to keep pursuing things artistically because otherwise, like, what's the point? How is it going to connect with people?
Yeah, I'm fascinated with this at the moment, this thought of the effect that limitations have on
Mm,
creativity, which instinctively you go, well, you shouldn't have any,
yeah.
instinctually you say you shouldn't have any
Hmm.
limits on creativity. But I find cr- limits almost sometimes for me, they spur creativity. Like if you give me a blank
Mm.
page and say you can write jokes about whatever you want to write about,
Oh
um,
yeah.
it's
Like, what do you even write down? You go, you
yeah,
like, you start writing some crap about a bird or some shit because
yeah.
you're just like, well, what's in my brain?
That's the thing. Whereas if you give me, okay, so this, you're going to write a topic, and this is the audience you've got to
Hmm.
make it connect with. But
Yeah.
just having that framework then goes, okay, there's some limitations on how I can approach this and what I can do, and that almost clicks in, and you go, okay, well, how do I be creative within that space? I'm
Hmm.
fascinated with the idea of being of. I think some of the best art comes from working out how to be creative within very
Yes,
specific limits.
I agree. I think when you think about art or creativity, it is all about communication. And because of that, it's like, well, who am I communicating to? And how am I communicating it? And I think that is something that to me is like one of the great limitations. And I think stand-up comedy, because it's direct communication, and it was the first time, like I'd done obviously other creative things before I started doing stand-up,
Mm.
but stand-up was where I found my voice and like how to communicate. And I think because of that, that's so informed everything else I've ever done, because it's like direct communication. And so you it's such a good training ground, because then you go, well, I know how people hear things. So I know how people understand things. And you can't ever escape from going, because that's like the background. I'm sure you can relate to this and see it, where it goes, well, it's so important to how an audience receives something. I think
Yes.
when you like talk to people, when you talk to other comedians, like you go, they all understand that implicitly, where they completely care about what the audience feels at all
Mm.
points. Even like, you could be like a whack surrealist, strange, odd, weirdo comedian, like as they still care about what the audience feels. And
Yeah.
so I think it's just like it's something that in other artistic forms and creative forms that doesn't exist. But because of like the stand-up comedy background, it's like that's always in my head. I go, well, how are they going to think about this? How are they going to receive this? What's an audience going to feel about this? And it's so a key part of my creativity. And I think that's the limitation of going like, well, okay, who am I making for? When we were making Finding Jesus, we're going, okay, how it's going to be a bit different to the podcast, because we're making it for a different audience on YouTube and making it probably for a younger audience than we'd made before. And so it just kind of didn't change what we were doing, didn't change who we were, didn't really change how we presented things. It just changed the form or the shape or maybe the direct communication of it all. Just only it changed it, but that became the challenge that excited us.
It goes back to what we were talking about before about the accessibility of
Mm,
how do you let that audience connect with what you're trying to do. And sometimes it's
yeah,
just like I think of a lot in terms of just building entrance and exit ramps for people onto your
yeah,
wavelength. If your ideas are
yeah.
a freeway, how do you make it easy for them to get on the freeway and join you
Oof,
for a bit?
I love that. That's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah,
That's
well,
it.
mate,
That's it.
and and some of us have tolls on our freeways and some of us don't.
That's awesome.
Mate, I'm conscious of not taking up too much more of your time. This
Mm,
has been absolutely fantastic. Now, before we go, I will get you to plug all your projects where people
yeah.
can find you and stuff. But because obviously film recommendations are a passion of yours, letting people find their favorite thing. Now, what I want you to do is I'm going to put you back into
Hmm.
the video store days. Picture all of Australia's come in. They're all
Yeah.
listening today, and they've all come in, and they want to rec for they want to hire three
Yeah.
movies that they haven't seen. They want a comedy.
Hmm.
They want a drama, and then they want something just a bit different, whether it's a horror or whether it's
Hmm.
a whatever. I need the what are we recommending that that Australia take away for the weekend?
Man, okay, the first one that came to mind was a comedy. Is far out. Where's it from? Okay, give me a moment. I have to check
No,
my
you're right.
facts on this one.
You are
Um,
back in video store days because
I am
this was
back.
important to the guys behind this. I actually had a guy look up. He was trying to while I was talking to him. There was a movie I enjoyed, and one of the guys goes, "There's something else by that same," and he was looking up the director for me
Hmm.
to find me the
Yeah.
next recommendation. So the facts are always important if you're going to work at was called Mondo Video,
Mondo Movies, mate.
Mondo
Mondo
Movies.
Movies.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mondo Video is probably a better name, actually, because it sounds like a pun of like something.
You know,
All right. So comedy is this Danish movie called Clown. Um,
clown.
Clown. And basically what this is, it's a continuation of a Danish TV show that was basically their version of Curb Your Enthusiasm, but
Oh
it's
wow.
way raunchier, way crazier. And the film is it's all these comedians playing themselves, like these famous Danish comedian stuff. And it's basically two comedians. One's crazy and raunchy. One is like more of like a Larry David type nerd guy, and they basically go on like a sex tourism holiday, like in a little boat, a rowboat, and they take with them because the one of the guys is trying to prove to his partner that he could be a good father. They basically lightly kidnap, or not even kidnap, they take with them the nephew of one of the guys, and they get up to some really debaucherous stuff. It's such edgy comedy and so funny that I remember just howling laughing when I saw it for the first time.
That's so good. I just pictured the warnings, rated MA,
Hmm.
sex scenes, adult themes, and light kidnapping
Yeah,
as being
light kidnapping.
as being the
A
warning.
light kidnapping.
That's
For a drama, what can I say? Like, what's a good drama that I can recommend? Oh, okay. Talking about Gillian Armstrong, I would say Last Days of Shay Nu. It's like set in Sydney, uh, in like the Glebe foreshore kind of area, 1990s. And it's just like a real slice of life. It's got a bit of melodrama, but it's grounded in a lot of like naturalistic realism. I think it's really great, and like not many people know about it these days. I think it's a really great drama, and that is on Broly. You can watch it right now. It's hard to find, but now it's on Broly, which is like where I've been making this podcast for. It's like Australian streaming service, and
nice.
then something weird. Okay, something weird. Hmm, something weird. Oh. Okay, the weirdest thing that, or maybe just a little bit outside the box. Probably my favorite movie of the year is a new Todd Haynes movie called May December, and it comes out in Australia like either December or January, and it is stars Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore, and it is to me a delicious premise. The whole premise is back in like the early 90s or something, or like, or back in the 90s, early 2000s, there's this big tabloid scandal where a grown woman seduces and has a long time affair with a minor, someone who's underage. So obviously it's like one of those, there was all those stories back in the day where it's like that's a huge news story. It's like these
Yeah,
people
yeah.
that are nobodies, but it like somehow catches on as like a tabloid paper. So Julianne Moore and her now husband, that was their relationship. That's how the relationship began, where he's like underage, like not even a teenager, I don't think.
Oh
And
wow.
so it's like all that's like, oh my God, like that's fucked up. The movie itself is about Natalie Portman playing an actress who is going to play that woman in a movie. And she goes to meet them, live with them, and study like that woman so she can play her in a film. And that's what the movie May December is. And I just think
Wow.
that's such a delicious, like devious, fun premise for a film.
That's such a it's I don't know if it's meta the way they're
Mm,
telling, but it's certainly like it's not just it's not just looking at the story, but the way those stories are told is fascinating.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's it. I think it's really fascinating.
well, there Australia's got their homework. Now, where can people come and find you and find all the stuff like all your projects?
I'm at This Is Alexia on most of those platforms. You can find all my shit on those platforms, your social medias. But the new podcast is Sunburnt Screens, the Australian Cinema Odyssey. I would love for you to check it out and join me on the journey into Aussie film.
Oh, mate, thank you so much for doing this, Aelexei Toliopolous. Please, people, go check out everything he does because, as you've heard, it's done with fun and passion. So I can't recommend it highly enough.
Man, thank you so much, Andrew. It's been so fun catching up and hanging out. Let's do it again soon, man. We got to do
Let's
it again soon.
let's definitely do that. Maybe
Yeah.
over a beer soon too. That'd be
I would
great.
love that. You know, I fucking love a beer.
Yeah, same, mate. Thanks so much.
Thank you.